Hey everybody, welcome to Tech Tuesday. Today I'm going to be talking about the latest in broadband news for broadband service providers. I'll be right back. Thanks for joining me. I'm Rick Uzzi with Zcorum, and again today what I'm going to be talking about is broadband news, and this tends to be aimed at those that are providing broadband services. So let's get started. Let's see what's going on recently. So, of course, we had an election, and as part of that, the makeup of the FCC is going to be changing. So, right before the administration, the new administration took over. Actually, the FCC released a report, and that's kind of controversial because they released it the day before. FCC Broadband Deployment Report released one day ahead of the administration change. So this was Chairman Pai releasing this, and the FCC does this every year. It says the report found that significant progress has been made to bridge the digital divide. So this is the last administration talking about what they've done, I guess, while they've been in power. So the FCC is required to make this determination based on data gathered for each year's report about whether broadband is being deployed in a reasonable and timely fashion. Republican administrations, such as the outgoing one, generally find in favor of timely progress, while Democratic administrations generally find that progress isn't fast enough. Now, of course, I would think whoever's in power is going to say that they've been doing a good job, regardless of the party. But I think progress has been made. So it says here, in the last 3 years, the number of Americans in areas without access to fixed broadband at speeds of 25 by 3 megabits per second has been nearly cut in half. 25 by 3 is the FCC's current definition for what qualifies as broadband. That figure has gone up over time. It's been a 25.3 for a while, and a lot of people wanted them to change that to something more like 100 by 10. But the FCC decided to keep that, at least for this year, as it is, and we'll see if that remains that way with the new administration. Of course, the other side feels differently. Democratic FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Starks had a different take. In a statement, he called the report findings, such as the one this year, unwarranted victory laps. So in other words, last minute, getting this report out early, victory lap, kind of bragging a little bit as the prior administration leaves the building. So Starks also argued that the report should not have been released so close to the administration change, noting that after the November election, congressional leaders wrote to Pai to urge the commissioner to stop work on all partisan and controversial items during the presidential transition. This item is both, he said. So here are some of the things that the report stated about broadband. So the gap between urban and rural Americans with access to 25.3 fixed broadband dropped 30 percentage points from the end of 2016 to 16 points at the end of 2019. 83% of Americans now live in areas served by at least 25 by 3 broadband, up 15 points since 2016, so that's pretty good. The number of Americans without access to 25 by 3 dropped more than 18.1 million at the end of 2018 to less than 14.5 million at the end of 2019. And over the last 2 years, the percentage of Americans without access to mobile broadband with a median speed of 10 by 3 has been slashed from over 35% to 10%. And then at the end of 2019, mobile providers offered 5G to approximately 60% of Americans. Now, that's going to be 5G. That's not going to be really super fast 5G. That's basically providers like T-Mobile and AT&T, not so much Verizon because they're focusing on urban areas. Verizon's focusing on urban areas, and they're focusing on millimeter wave, which is the really, really fast 5G broadband, but that's also the 5G broadband that has very high attenuation. So it doesn't go very far, can't pass through walls or trees. So T-Mobile has been rolling out what they're calling their nationwide 5G using a much slower spectrum, a lower spectrum, and because of that, it's faster than their 4G, but not a whole lot faster. So there's not, that's nice that people can claim they're getting 5G, but it's going to be not that much more than the mobile service that they're getting today. It's worth noting that the data on which report findings were based likely overstates broadband availability. It is based on Form 477 data collected from carriers. So this has been a complaint for a long time, in that when operators have to report who they're providing broadband to and the speeds, they only have to report their highest package, and if one in a particular census block, and if one subscriber has that service, then that whole census block is considered served. So they may be counting or overstating the number of Americans that actually get this, because it could be that much fewer people in a census block are getting the service than they're actually saying are getting it, and that's been a complaint. But that's being fixed. So the same day that the FCC released that broadband deployment report, the Commission also issued an order detailing how the broadband data collection process would be revised to more accurately reflect broadband availability. And that was based on a congressional act that was passed this past year, and then an FCC report and order that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And I did a broadcast on this broadband mapping and that congressional act last week. I was going to put a comment down below, but I was having a problem right before here to find any way to put a comment on this broadcast right now live. So I'll do so after this broadcast, and also I'll go ahead and put a little link up here that'll pop up right about now if you wanted to click back to that. Or you can just go to our YouTube channel and just look for last week's Tech Tuesday, and you can watch that about the new broadband mapping initiative, which is going to make that much more accurate. More FCC. So again, we've got a new administration. So FCC's Jessica Rosenworcel. Time to think big and act. So she's talking about some of the first things that she's going to be doing. First public meeting in the center seat will consist of status reports on works in progress, responsive to the Congress passage of the COVID-19 aid package. So there was a lot of money there that was allocated for broadband in that act. The FCC has 60 days to come up with a process for handling the $3.2 billion in broadband subsidies for lower income residents. So they're going to have to act on that information and that money. Then the FCC will outline another congressional mandate with money attached to the $249.95 million to expand telehealth. And then the third presentation will be on improving broadband mapping. This is what I was just talking about. Something Congress mandated and finally funded. So that was a big problem, is Congress mandated it, I think in like May of last year, but they never allocated any funds. So those funds were appropriated in December as part of the COVID-19 relief package, and then the FCC did their report and order, just like I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. They're now outlining what service providers are going to have to do in order to start reporting this broadband data. So that's why it would be good if you're an internet service provider that's providing broadband, go ahead and check out that broadcast from last week. It'll also be time to find consensus on any items to be voted, since the Commission will be at a 2-2 tie until President Biden can nominate and the Senate confirm a third Democrat. So right now, they're at 2-2, which when you're at 2-2 and as partisan an environment as we are, a lot of times nothing gets done. Sometimes that's good when nothing gets done in Congress or in the FCC. But in this case, if the Biden administration wants to get anything done, if they want to pass anything, they really do probably need another commissioner. So that will have to be, somebody will have to be nominated and then approved by the Senate there. More on the FCC. The new FCC could revive net neutrality, but right now it has more pressing issues. So I think we heard about some of those issues that they're working on. This is a opinion piece that's talking about how that really needs to be done, and what it's kind of I find it amusing. So forget Republican versus Democrat for a moment. Forget about companies trying to influence the FCC to gain an unfair advantage for a moment. In fact, forget all the partisan nonsense for a moment. And then there's a partisan statement right after this. Rosenworcel knows that in America, especially if you compare it to other rich Western nations, the internet is broken, and we need strong internet to compete across all things in 2021 and beyond. So the internet's not broken in this country. We have fantastic internet in this country. We are a different country than most other places in the world. We're much bigger. We have much vaster areas of rural communities that are far, people are spread far apart compared to lots of other small countries where more of the population is consolidated in urban areas, high density areas. So it's much easier in those areas to roll out broadband everywhere versus where you've got, only, one customer in a couple of miles. It's kind of hard to do that. So the FCC has been taking a lot of steps, including the Connect America Fund, the CAF2 auction, and the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, the RDOF funds that are now being released to operators in order to get rural broadband deployed, as well as funds from the USDA and new spectrum coming for 5G wireless, CBRS spectrum and C-band spectrum. So a lot is being done, and you saw some of those numbers. A lot has happened in that time. And again, I can tell it's partisan when somebody starts talking about net neutrality in the way that they do. So while the Title II classification was short-lived, in 2017, then FCC Chair Ajit Pai led the vote for restoring internet freedom by ending net neutrality and revoking the Title II status of ISPs. So that did not end net neutrality, it ended the Title II status of ISPs. If you ended net neutrality, that would presume that there was net neutrality and then you ended it and there was no longer net neutrality. But the reality is that we have net neutrality. We've always had net neutrality and we still have net neutrality. So all that they ended were the regulations. That's an important point. And when they put those regulations on in the Obama administration, they used Title II regulations, which were really put together in the 30s and then later in the 1990s, 95 or something like that, that were all really prior to broadband. So they were really meant for telephone service. So it was not a good way to regulate. If they want to regulate, they should really come up with a new congressional bill that would regulate specifically for broadband. But is it required? Because again, we've been net neutral. It's not like when the previous administration took off the net neutrality regulations that suddenly people couldn't get to places on the internet. That was not impacted. In fact, the biggest impact we've seen is not related to internet service providers, it's related to content providers, big tech, and maybe them limiting speech on the internet. So that's a whole area that's not at all been covered by net neutrality, and it's not covered by the network. It's more about the content providers. So the internet's neutral. The FCC is currently deadlocked in a 2-2 voting split, as I mentioned. The Democrats will eventually appoint a third member to give it a majority, but it may take a while. So the cogs of restoring net neutrality may take a while to get moving. So again, we don't need to restore net neutrality. Net neutrality is already there. It's already neutral. Everybody can get everywhere they want on the internet. And I don't anticipate that ending because it is in the interest of all broadband providers to let their customers get wherever they want on the internet, assuming that it's legal content or assuming that you're like not North Korea or China or somewhere where you're trying to keep your people from seeing stuff. That's not been the case here in this country. So I think that was it on this story that I wanted to see. Yeah. Now, speaking of funds to deploy rural internet, we had the RDOF auction, and there were some congressmen that worry that those funds will be squandered. So a bipartisan group, 158 congressmen, sent a letter to the FCC asking the agency to thoroughly vet the winning bidders of the first phase of the RDOF reverse auction to ensure that they're capable of deploying and delivering the services they committed to be providing. These winners must submit long-form applications, and the congressmen are asking the FCC to review the long-form applications to make sure each provider actually has the technical, financial, and operational skills to deliver the services that they pledged, which is actually part of that process. So as part of RDOF, everybody had to submit a short-form application that had some details, and then the FCC looked at those and said, okay, does it look like you are able to bid? If you were to win this, does it look from the information that you're providing that you could actually do this? And they didn't want to make it really onerous, because they want to make sure they had people bidding. But now comes the harder part. So now they have to fill out, the people that won the bid have to fill out the long form applications. And here they have to provide a lot more information on their technical capabilities, their financial capabilities. They have to provide financial statements for like 3 years. If they don't have that, they have to jump through a bunch of hoops. So that's already in place. So the question is the FCC, are they actually monitoring all this? It says here, before the congressmen sent their letter to the FCC, the analysts at New Street Research had already pointed out that if the history of the FCC auction is an indicator, the winners of the RDOF auction could default on their promises with few repercussions in the future. Well, I don't know about that. I don't know where they're getting that from because, well, for one thing, it takes a while before they can default because these they get this money and then they have 10 years to deploy all of this stuff. Now, there are milestones they have to meet. And maybe what they're saying here is that they don't meet certain milestones and the FCC gives them a pass and gives them a little bit more time. So that's probably what they're talking about. But as we'll see here in a minute, the FCC, can take this money back. In our view, this opens the door to the new FCC to reject a number of applications from smaller players who won large sums, stated Levin today. We do not think this will affect the amounts won by Charter, the rural electric co-ops, or Starlink. So there were a lot of people that bid on this, including a consortium of like 90 plus electric co-ops and Starlink, the satellite provider, SpaceX. So they're saying that this is going to be more the small providers that can't do this, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the small providers are actually able to do this. Sometimes it's the larger providers that can't do that. In fact, we look here. Here it says CenturyLink and Frontier failed to meet the FCC deadline for rural broadband rollout, and this is related to CAF2. Because again, this CAF2, they've got 10 years to get this stuff going, and it's been several years into that now. As part of the Connect America Fund 2 grants in 2015, the FCC awarded CenturyLink and Frontier a combined total of $789 million in federal funds to expand broadband services to rural Americans. Both companies have failed again to meet their broadband deployment deadlines. CenturyLink and Frontier still have 1 year to finish their respective rollouts according to the FCC's grant stipulations. If the ISPs fail again, USAC, which is governed by the FCC, takes the money back plus interest. So there are consequences for not doing this. So it is being watched, and there are consequences. Frontier said in its filing that the company was unable to complete its rollout in time because it was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and you could see that being a good excuse for lots of different things this year and last year. They were not able to deploy in Alabama, Arizona, California, Illinois, Indiana, and you can see all these states here. So there were several states they could not deploy. CenturyLink said in its filing that it failed to meet its broadband deployment quota in all of these other states as well: Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, etc. And they did not give a reason why. So you can see there are consequences, and these are not. It's not like these are your mom and pop telcos or cable companies or wireless providers or whatever that are defaulting on this. These are major providers that have not been able to meet that demand for the. So again, they've received these funds, and it helps defray their costs, but they need to get the broadband deployed within a certain amount of time, with certain milestones, with certain speeds, with certain latencies, and they're not meeting that. So AT&T, this is interesting from the CEO of AT&T, says with it just says here, with AT&T fiber penetration on the rise, the CEO questions rural fiber viability. So he's talking about, is fiber viable in these rural markets, even if you get funds? So AT&T added over 1 million new fiber subscribers in 2020, with 237,000 net adds in Q4 alone in 2020. AT&T fiber penetration now stands at 34%, up from 28% a year ago. That's a 21% year-over-year improvement in AT&T fiber penetration, and some of that was probably driven by the pandemic, in that they had a lot of demand, with the company now counting 4.9 million total fiber to the premise connections. With this momentum, the company also announced plans to increase homes passed with fiber by an additional 2 million locations in 2021, so that's quite a boost there. DSL and VDSL has been a drag on the company's overall broadband numbers, so that's their older technology. AT&T actually lost, this is interesting, with all of these fiber ads, they actually lost 2,000 broadband subscribers in fourth quarter 2020 and 19,000 for all of 2020. So compared to what they added, that's not a lot, but it's interesting that net-wise, they actually lost broadband subscribers because of this DSL and VDSL, that old technology that's out there. While AT&T is bullish on fiber penetration, don't expect the company to extend its fiber footprint in rural markets, even if regulatory subsidies encourage it. So they're saying they don't really want to get into that game. But of course, they're not really in rural markets, right? So those rural markets tend to be, you've got other incumbents there. Again, your small regional telephone companies, your independent cable companies, the guys that you never hear about that, serve a small region of a state or even just a small city or town. This view of rural fiber probably contributed to AT&T's absence in the recent RDOF auction. So they did not participate in the RDOF auction, but again, other larger providers did. So they're looking at that money to help them expand in certain areas, but AT&T is not looking to expand, I think, in areas outside of their footprint. The CEO said, I actually believe, candidly, even if there is a subsidy put in, it would be a better use of taxpayer money to do something that was more hybrid-oriented in the technologies that are applied and not exclusively lean on fiber in that space. They may be talking about themselves possibly doing 5G, maybe, in certain areas. As far as those additional 2 million locations, they're more likely to be upgrading existing VDSL locations in the neighborhoods that surround them to fiber to the premise rather than undertaking completely new greenfield builds. So that's good news for a lot of these incumbent ISPs in these small rural areas that AT&T doesn't plan on encroaching and overbuilding in those areas. It sounds like they're going to stick to wherever they're providing service now and trying to upgrade some of this old technology, this old DSL technology. So what's going on with satellite? Elon Musk's Starlink satellite's now been approved in the UK, and people are receiving their beta kits. So Ofcom, that's the UK official, kind of like FCC, I guess. Ofcom granted Elon Musk Aerospace Company authorization for Starlink in November. SpaceX began running a Starlink beta in the US in late 2020, so they've been running that here a little bit longer. UK license allows Starlink to compete against terrestrial ISPs like British Telecom Group and traditional satellite companies such as OneWeb. People in the UK who signed up for SpaceX's better than nothing beta test. That's funny. So they call it better than nothing. I thought at first it was better than nothing because it's like maybe it was better than your old geosynchronous satellite service that you had that was so slow with such high latency. But it's really what they were saying was it's better than nothing because they want people to know, they're trying to set their expectations. They want them to know this is a beta test, so the speeds are not going to be fantastic. They're going to be way better than what you have now. And because it's a beta test, there may be times when your internet's just not there. They don't have as many satellites up as they should or could or will, right? So better than nothing. Costs about $600 US up front and about $120 monthly for a subscription. So it's not cheap. And the $120, I hadn't heard that. I heard it was going to be more like $80 to $90, something along what current satellite providers are charging. So I guess that remains to be seen. So this one gentleman had been getting download speeds of only about 0.5 megabits per second. So I guess 512K is what he was getting with BT Internet, and I'm assuming that's a DSL service. Now with Starlink, he's averaging 85 megabits per second, so that's really much better. He said, within the hour, we ran a Zoom quiz with grandchildren. It was wonderful, he said. So I'm guessing he meant he Zoomed. I don't know what a Zoom quiz is. Maybe he Zoomed with his grandkids, or maybe the kids were doing school and they were able to do that there. I don't know. SpaceX said in an email to subscribers on October 26 that users participating in the beta test could expect speeds of 50 to 150. Some have said they're getting download speeds of more than 210 megabits per second. So, and it will probably go faster than that as they get more birds up there, more of these low Earth orbit satellites. More about this. So this is an opinion piece here, how satellites and mobile networks will compete, from this gentleman right here. And he says, he's talking about how he witnessed firsthand the disasters of the Iridium and Globalstar business plans in the 1990s. Failures of these first systems came down to simple economics. In the late 1980s, when the projects were started, mobile voice connectivity was priced at $1 per minute. But by 1998, when the systems were launched, voice connectivity had dropped below 10 cents per minute. So, right there, this was really for mobile phones, and that was the use case at the time for these satellites. But the technology changed and the pricing changed, and it kind of priced them out of the market. Now we're just hearing about the guy who was getting 512K from BT Group, and then now he's getting much better with Starlink. But if BT Group goes and puts fiber there, then suddenly maybe Starlink's not needed. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts things, or 5G maybe being released in this area. Today, voice connectivity is not the main driver. We've moved to data connectivity. So the relevant metrics are the cost per gigabyte of data delivered and the cost per square kilometer of coverage. So he talks about a satellite constellation can be inexpensive in terms of cost per square kilometer because you've got this constellation of satellites up there. Once they're up there, anyway, the cost is low per square kilometer. He says Open RAN, or Radio Access Network's 5G solution in a remote area of a third world country costs roughly $15,000 compared to satellite, which is about $1,200 per square kilometer. So that's a big difference, a big advantage there for satellite. The O-RAN equipment is cheap, so the difference comes mostly from the cost of backhaul. and providing power to remote towers. So that's the issue with these remote cellular operations is you've got lots of backhaul, you've got lots of towers, and if he's talking about 5G, you've got lots and lots of towers, and you've got to have line of sight if you're talking millimeter wave. So if you're not talking millimeter wave, then again, it's going to be very similar to the 4G kind of service we get today. However, the cost of gigabyte can be a major challenge where O-RAN-based networks can deliver data at about $1.40 per gigabyte. And he's saying that's artificially high because of the backhaul and the power. Satellites provide data for roughly $5 to $8 per gigabyte. Satellites spend a lot of time over oceans and uninhabited areas, so the utilization of radio capacity is low, making each gigabyte very expensive. Now, something he's not taking into account there is that one of the use cases for SpaceX and Starlink is that they can use their satellites as long-haul transportation over the ocean. So right now, we've got cables, fiber cables running under the ocean. They're very expensive to lay those cables. And actually, with the satellites, you actually get lower latency on long distances like that. Because as you get fiber, fiber is very low latency, but as you extend the length of that fiber, that latency is going to grow. And shooting a signal through space, in the vacuum of space, you're going to have lower latency at that distance than you will sending light through a piece of glass. So, Elon Musk can can actually make a lot of revenue providing that kind of service through space as maybe more connections are needed or more bandwidth is needed to cross over the Atlantic or the Pacific, for example. So I don't think he's taking that into account. At $5 to $8 per gig, it'll be difficult to make money. It might be at that rate. He says a $99 per month plan will, and here's he's saying about $100 per month, will only cover 10 to 20 gigabytes per month, which is not enough for the video streaming, and that's absolutely true. Not nearly enough for video streaming that rural customers want or anybody wants. Looking at another way, there are not enough worldwide customers at $99 per month to pay for the constellation because at $10 to $20 mobile plan works much better for most people worldwide. Well, I don't know about a $10 to $20 mobile plan where you get that. Especially if you're in an area where there's not a lot of competition, and especially if you're talking about 5G service, which would be comparable to this as far as latency and bandwidth. So I'm not sure that's a good comparison there. In the end, we expect that Starlink, OneWeb, and Kuiper, and other satellite ventures to declare bankruptcy, just like Iridium and Globostar. So this is interesting. So he's basically saying, well, you see here, they simply cannot compete in the mainstream markets where 5G will deliver the data at 20 cents per gigabyte or less. So again, in some of these remote areas, will we have 5G that will be fast? Will they be putting lots of microcells clustered together that have to have line of sight in these rural areas? Is 5G really a rural technology? I don't think so, at least not anytime soon. 5G is going to be, the millimeter wave is going to be in urban areas where you can have line of sight and you can have lots of customers. So I don't think that's, again, a fair comparison. So here he says, but bankruptcy is where the story will get interesting. At that point, we'll have thousands of satellites orbiting the Earth effectively free. So what he's saying is, when these satellite companies, like let's say SpaceX, this is basically Elon Musk. So he's probably not going to go bankrupt. But let's say he decides to shut down Starlink or sell it off or something like that, or go bankrupt, part of his company, I don't know. But if it did, then those satellites will be up there. Basically, the sunk costs will be up as far as launching those constellations, and then it's going to be cheap to operate at that point. He says, keep in mind that bankruptcy will not cause the satellites to immediately crash into the Earth. They'll hang up there. When you eliminate all the upfront costs of launch, hardware, and software development, and ground station setup, these networks will be much cheaper. I predict that sometime in the 2030 timeframe, we'll see new owners emerge with these satellites at a great low-cost solution in rural markets. But the problem is that these satellites only have like a 5 or 6 year longevity up in space. They need to be, and then they come down, and then they basically, I think they burn up. So they're going to have to be constantly rotated, doing new launches. So it's not like if these go bankrupt that then you can just say, well, the satellite's up there and we'll just use them as long as we can. They're going to have to continually replace these satellites for them to maintain the kind of bandwidth that they need and coverage that they need. At the end of the story, we expect to see satellite options as another part of the HETnet, or the heterogeneous network. A mobile operator will be able to add a super coverage layer, finally augmenting their coverage of population centers with full coverage everywhere. So what they're saying is that maybe a mobile operator will take it over, and then they will have the ability to hit some of the areas that they can't hit now with their cell towers with satellite. But actually, that is a use case, again, for somebody like Elon Musk, where he can lease this satellite space to mobile operators who want to expand their service. So again, I don't see that as being a factor or driving factor for this. I think satellite, we'll have to see whether it can work out, whether the pricing works out, but I think for the reasons he's saying here, I don't expect them to go bankrupt for those reasons. Let's see. Oh, so as this kind of connected here. So Alphabet shuts down Loon and its balloons. So I don't know if anybody even knows about this, but so Google had this this project going called Loon, where they would launch these balloons, and the idea was very similar to the satellites, was to have these balloons up in fairly fixed orbits, so to speak. Obviously not up to where these lower orbit satellites are, but that was a technology that could steer these balloons where they wanted to go, right? And that was going to be the solution for providing broadband to these hard-to-reach areas. So that crazy science experiment that started out as Project Loon to deliver internet to hard-to-reach areas is going away. Ex-captain of moonshots, Astor Teller, don't you love that title? So that was his title over there. And Loon CEO Alistair Westgarth announced the final flight in separate blogs on Thursday. Google introduced Project Loon in 2013, and it later became an entity within Google parents Alphabet. X is Alphabet's research lab, aka the Moonshot Factory. So that's what that is. So the research lab they call the Moonshot Factory. Some said it would never work, but they were able to create the balloons, launch them into the stratosphere, and steer them over areas to deliver internet connectivity in hard-to-reach places or regions hit by natural disasters, which they did do in Puerto Rico in 2017. They were able to get the balloons over there and help with broadband connectivity there because everything else was down. While we found a number of willing partners along the way, we haven't found a way to get costs low enough to build a long-term sustainable business. And I'm sure that SpaceX and Starlink has kind of been a big factor there. So you've got all these satellites going to be up there. You don't need the balloons anymore, basically. So satellites will have coverage everywhere. This is an interesting story here on the streaming side, video side. So Netflix, Hulu, and Disney are sued again over cable franchise fees. So a lot of people have been cutting the cord and going with, dropping the video service, pay TV service from their cable operators. And 3 Georgia municipalities, this is my home state here, join a growing national fight to make streaming companies pay the same 5% regulatory bill as cable companies. And then also they're suing the satellite TV operators as well, Dish and DirecTV, also defendants. So these 3 Georgia municipalities have sued Netflix, Hulu, and Disney, seeking to collect millions of dollars in fees dating back several years. So they want to go back several years on this. The counties of Gwinnett, which is not far from where I am, that's in Metro Atlanta, and Athens, Clarke, which is where the University of Georgia is, as well as the city of Brookhaven, which is kind of midtown, downtown Atlanta. Also names the satellite TV operators and DirecTV and Dish Networks as defendants. Federal lawsuit alleges that the defendants violated a 2007 state law called the Georgia Consumer Choice for Television Act. That law stipulates that companies supplying video services to local residents have to pay quarterly franchise fees to local governments. So right now, obviously, cable operators that want to provide cable TV in a particular area, they have to pay a franchise fee. So they're saying all of these over-the-top providers, and I would assume anybody that's providing any kind of IPTV service that's not maybe located in that area, like a YouTube TV, any of these folks that are going over the top should be paying these franchise fees. Nationally, a number of similar lawsuits are ongoing. In August, 4 Indiana cities, including Indianapolis, jointly filed suit in a local state court against the same defendants. They've got their own they're seeking payment under the Video Services Franchise Act in their state. That's in 2012, the Act of 2012. And also, 2018, the city of Creve Coeur in Missouri filed a similar suit against Netflix under its state's Video Services Provider Act. So this is going to be interesting to see what happens here. Gwinnett County estimates that Netflix has generated $103 million in revenue over the last 5 years streaming video to the county with just over 1 million residents. The video franchise bill alone would come to $5.15 million for just one supplier. So that's just one of these suppliers. So that's a lot of money. So you can see why these local counties and governments are going after this. I think we'll have to see what plays out. Obviously, there'll be some court decisions, and that'll set some precedents, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But this may be something that maybe levels the playing field a little bit between the incumbent pay TV provider that's paying the franchise fee, video franchise fees in an area, and some of these over-the-top providers. And then the last story, Master G says 2/3 of workers don't want to return to the office. There's probably people watching right now that are going, amen, I don't want to go back to the office. It says about 2/3 of knowledge workers are happier working from home than they were pre-COVID when they had to commute to their jobs. Initially, the workers wanted to work from home because of their concerns about their health and safety. But now that they've gotten used to it over the last several months, as many as 2/3 do not want to physically go back to the office. Now, it has a lot to do with that lost productivity around commuting, and that really makes quite a difference when you're not spending, here in Atlanta, a lot of people they don't go very far, and they might spend 2 hours in the car commuting, and it's not like we're commuting that far. There's a lot of traffic, so that does make quite a difference. They've also learned new work habits based on remote collaboration on Slack or with Teams using Zoom, WebEx, etc. So people are used to it now. They know how to be productive. They know how to get the job done. I said many of these workers will be okay with a hybrid model where they work part-time at home and part-time at the office. Surprisingly, most corporations are very open to those ideas. The COVID crisis forced a new paradigm, and the crisis has gone on for so long that it's becoming accepted and even expected to work from home in the future. So this is going to be a challenge for companies that don't offer that option, because a lot of companies are going to be offering that. And a lot of it's going to be because they're realizing themselves, the companies are realizing, hey, our employees are being productive. In fact, they're maybe being more productive at home because they're using some of that time where they were commuting, and they can work. They're used to working at different hours. I mean, people are working their 8 hours plus. And then also the other big thing is maybe they reduce their real estate costs. So there's probably a lot of companies that are looking at that monthly bill for the office they're leasing, or the mortgage or whatever they're doing there, and they're probably going, why am I paying for this? Or why do I need such a big building? So I could see where some companies will be, if not going fully remote, maybe reducing that footprint that they have in the office and maybe letting people work from home. That can help morale. So like I say, it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the commercial real estate market, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with companies as they try to hold on to their employees and try to recruit new employees as far as their policies for working from home. And what this means for broadband providers is that, we obviously saw a big spike in the broadband market on bandwidth as everybody pretty much went home for a while. That included employees as well as students, and people doing things at home like I'm doing right now, which is streaming. Where normally I'd be sitting in the office in a conference room, I'm doing it from home. You've got my kids are doing doing some of their work online. Right now they're back in school, but I mean, there's times when they're doing stuff online. There's other kids that are not back in school yet. Lots of people, lots of upstream bandwidth being used. So we've seen that big spike, but I think what this is saying is that we're not going to go back to where we were, because there's still going to be more people working at home after the pandemic, even after everything is, hopefully settled down and we've got vaccines out there. I think we're still going to be seeing a pretty good increase from where we were prior to the pandemic. Not going to be as high as it was during the peak, but I think we'll see the bottom or the floor settle at a higher level. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up on the YouTube video, and you can click the subscribe button and make sure that you click the bell, and you'll be notified anytime that I am live. And I am live every Tuesday at 3 o'clock for Tech Tuesday. So thanks for joining me today, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.